So it's mid-January, and I wanted to do an update on some peach plants that I have over here. And this isn't really specifically about the peaches in and of themselves, although I will definitely touch on that, but more about growing stuff on extreme slopes. So this slope here is, I think, actually probably close to like 40 degrees. Doesn't necessarily look like that, but nearly, maybe 30. So probably, let me go to the side so you can get a real look at it. Right here, it goes from there down to there. It's, not a 45, but it's pretty darn steep. Kind of hard to see, but right behind this walnut in this valley over there, I would say it's actually, there's a stretch that's probably 45%, so 100% grade. And then on the north-facing slope, you've got, 30 degrees or something like that. So anyway, it's very, very steep. And I shied away from planting anything here for many years. And then I think probably 4 years ago, I planted these peaches. And so I wanted something that would grow fast and that wouldn't take a ton of maintenance. I don't know if I really chose the absolute best plant for that, but it's done fairly well. And so here we've got a bunch of peaches around this big walnut that's probably getting a little too big. Probably starting to make some juglone and whatnot, so I might have to deal with that at some point. Although maybe that means that the juglone just stays here and the walnut becomes the main thing and the peaches die. Because it'd be kind of fun to just wait at the bottom of this hill. Any nuts this thing produces would just roll right to your feet here. So might want to actually just go ahead and keep that and let the peaches be shorter lived. Anyway, these peaches were planted on this slope, I think 4 years ago. And this slope is just fill that the previous owners had put here, sort of like a big, they just filled this whole area in from the road or from the house and made a big garden up there. And then, so this is sort of just like the angle of repose of the material. And it's pretty schwanky material. There's a little bit of topsoil on top, but it's kind of like garbagey fill, which is a bummer. But it was grown up to poison ivy, bittersweet vine layer with black locust, multiflora rose, tree of heaven, mugwort, garlic mustard, Japanese knotweed polyculture. It was that was all wrapped around barbed wire and woven wire fence that had fallen down into poison ivy vines. I mean, it was truly like, it was hair-raising to get that out of there. So I sort of started it in fits and starts, but then I finally just committed and absolutely cleared everything. Got all the fence out, rolled away, got all those plants down to the ground. The poison ivy, I just went after, ripped the roots out. Same thing with the multiflora rose, still battling that a tiny bit. But I mean, literally ripped every root out that I could possibly physically get out. Pickaxes, whatever it took. And, it definitely sucked, but the whole thing took like 2 days. I mean, it's a small area, so that's a lot of time. But I guess the point is, I was looking at that mess for years before I pulled the trigger and just did that. Pull the trigger is a funny turn of phrase. I should probably stop using that as violence inherent in our language. Anyway, before I decided to commit to that. And so once that was out, I immediately planted these peach trees that I had been growing. They were small, though. They were, the initial whip on this guy here was just that right there. And then that's year like 2, 3, 4. So yeah, 4 years. And the growth had gotten a little out of hand this year, so I came in and started pruning. But the main thing I wanted to get across here is that you can grow things on super steep slopes, and the maintenance it can be a little bit tricky. So normally I'll just scythe underneath these because the mugwort is still coming back, the garlic mustard is still coming back. And this year, I'm not gonna try to go and plant too much more stuff in here because I really don't want to do a whole ton of management visits to this land other than, pruning and harvesting. So I'm gonna seed in some shade tolerant grasses that are low growing, some fescues and some probably a bunch of different nitrogen fixers. I'm not exactly sure what I'll put in, but basically I'm gonna have something that I can scythe because I've smoothed out the ground, I've gotten out the rocks and stuff like that, so I can scythe pretty comfortably, and that's gonna be my management going forward. And I'll just say a little word about the pruning. This is pretty low intensity management on these for pruning. This is the first time I've actually pruned them ever, which probably in some ways is a mistake. I probably could have had some better structure on some of them, but I do like to let them make their own decisions to a certain extent. This one, you've got 3 coming out of the base, and it's a fairly weak joint there in the middle, so that's not great. I don't know why that happened. But this one, it made pretty good choices there. Those are actually strong joints. It's hard to see. Those are strong joints on the bottom. And then I mostly was just removing ingrowing branches. So this one here is an ingrowing branch that I probably still should get out. You can see, by ingrowing, I mean if you make a column going from the center of the tree upwards, anything that's growing towards that column, it's usually a good idea to take it out because you'll let more light in to more canopy. So on peaches, it's really these buds that you want to maximize, because these are the fruiting buds and they only happen on last year's wood. And so you have to have fresh shoots of wood every year. You always want it to be growing quite a bit. So you do need to do a lot of pruning to get them to be productive year after year. Like a lot of growers would, if this was a commercial orchard, these would be taken down probably, to there, so that you'd get new growth coming out of, from about that height, 5 or 6 or even 4 feet, so that the peaches will be in reach. These peaches will not be in reach. And if we get a big heavy crop of peaches all the way up there, it's gonna put a huge torque on these branch, on the areas where one branch goes and meets another one, like that fork right there. That's gonna take a lot of torque on it. So I probably should bring them down a little bit too. But yeah, that's mostly what I wanted to share, is that if you have a steep spot where you don't think you can possibly grow anything, you definitely can. Winter pruning can be a little bit sketchy. You've got like a saw and loppers and your pruners. So what I use are these Yak Trax, or any kind of boot that has like real solid grip, because you really don't want to be slipping when you have sharp stuff in your hands. But I've got about, maybe 2.5 hours of pruning into this. I'm gonna put another half an hour in now and finish that up. There's one more peach down there. And so yeah, if you have really steep spots that look impenetrable, they definitely aren't. I would start, and here's a look at what it was like beforehand. So this is like black locust, grapevines, bittersweet vines. That's an enormous multiflora rose, mugwort all over the place. So really not a hospitable place to try new plantings. You really have to get all of those as much vegetation out as you possibly can, all the roots. I biocharred that when I did it over here, and I should maybe continue on this way. There's actually quite a bit of it, but as you can see, it does take a lot of time per area, so I haven't like finished the project. But my idea was eventually to take these sort of contoured planting lines and continue it on all the way out there, which, who knows, maybe someday. Right here we've got this beautiful stand of black locust poles that if I wait another 4 or 5 years, I'll get all the poles that I could need for fence posts if I want to do like some pretty significant paddocks for animals. Like if I wanted to fence in an area and have some steer or something like that, which may happen at some point. I just did a big project down here, connecting some spaces that were not connected before. There's a pond there that I'll talk about hopefully in the spring once I get to finish it off and plant it out a little bit. But there's a lot of activity going on down there, and so it would be nice for this to be an on the side hill orchard, and to harvest this pole wood at some point, but that needs a little bit of time. So I'm in no rush. And all the light-loving species, like black locust, for example, they're still sending some shoots up through these peaches, but the peaches cast such a deep shade and have covered the area so fully that there's really not that much competition coming up. So it's really like, oh, and the sumac I was battling for a few years as the peaches were getting established. Very easy to plant trees into something like this, even if you've cleared it to the ground, and then have them absolutely swallowed in a year or two. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a ton of follow-up management for the first 2 or 3 years. But, you know, essentially, this was an absolutely no-till planting establishment. I just dug holes into this craziness. I got out like I said, the poison ivy roots and the multiflora roots, but you can't get out all the black locust roots. So that I'm all just getting it flush to ground level and then scything a few times. You know, scything black locust and sumac shoots is easy when they're succulent and 2 or 3 feet tall and haven't hardened off. But you have to do that a few times a year, and you have to prioritize that, or else, you know, if I didn't prioritize that for the first 3 years, this is not what I'd be looking at right now. Anyway, brief introduction to some hillside establishment in a deeply perennial weedy context. So as just a follow-up here, I'm gonna prune this one now. Unfortunately, I do not have anyone who can film me pruning it, and my phone would die if I tried to do a time lapse or something like that. So I'm just going to do a quick look at it, prune it, and then do a little review. So tons of growth protruding out at the bottom prevents you from accessing the inside. It also prevents air from getting in the inside. So I'm going to take off a lot of the lower growth so that I can get in and pick fruit when it's there. There's too many stems in the middle, so I'm going to take out some of the ones that are going in towards that central pillar that you can think of coming out the middle of the trunk. If there's any cross branches rubbing on each other, they're going to come out. Diseased wood, that's going to come out. I'm not going to do a full-on pollard of this because I want this to be tall and cast shade for other reasons. But then, yeah, so I'm just going to thin out some of the growth and make access lanes. So I'll catch in, or I'll check in after I'm done. So just a couple minutes later, and I've done most of the cleanup that I want to do. Of course, I think most commercial peach growers would be appalled at what I have done. Most homeowners probably wouldn't do it this way either. There's a lot of different ways to prune, and basically what I'm looking for is, so these are Siberian seed peaches. These are all orchard of seedling Siberian peaches, and first of all, I kind of want to know what the tree wants to do. Like, how big is it going to get of its own accord? And ultimately, I would like to move towards a Masanobu Fukuoka style where you just plant the tree and let it do its own thing. I believed in that a lot early on, and since that time, I've had a hard time keeping that belief alive because I've just, in our area, unpruned peaches and apples become usually, for the most part, fairly unproductive, super biennial bearing. Whatever fruit is born way up high where you can hardly reach it, which is just about what looks like is going to happen with these peaches. But I still believe in this idea of maybe it can mostly take care of itself. So I'm waiting. This one didn't put on a crop, so it really hasn't reduced its own vigor. What happens is, you can see that tree is really upright. It's almost just growing straight up. And the fruit tree archetype is more like the one back there. That one put some fruit on, so it started to bend the branches down. This one, it hasn't really put anything on, so the branches are still going straight up. Once some weight gets on there, if it doesn't crack it at the base or crack it at the joint, it'll bend this down, and that changes the hormones in the plant so that it focuses on producing fruit and no longer produces as much upwards vigorous growth. So I'm sort of waiting for that to happen on some of these other ones. That one in the background that you can see these much wider angles, that's what happened there. And so my hope is that this one, but unfortunately, you can't really redo these angles once they form. So that's a weak angle. When the angle is low like that, it's weak. If it's like 90 degrees would be the best. That's super strong because the bark doesn't form in between. It's actually like all lignin and cellulose that are joining there. So these are weak angles. These are going to be short-lived trees. That's okay. That was sort of part of the plan here, is that I just wanted to get something growing for shade. Like here, there's a Asian pear planted to the north. It's growing in the shade fairly slowly, but that's going to be the eventual tree here. This is to get fruit while the Asian pear is growing. So that's what I usually do with shorter lived fruit trees, is I plant something else in their shade that can survive and start to be on a low simmer and take over eventually. And meanwhile, it's the peach's shade is suppressing everything else from growing here. Of course, it's suppressing the peach a little bit, or the pear a little bit too. But that's okay, because we will probably get a whole bunch of peaches off this for the next few years, or maybe it'll be longer than that. And anyway, so that's a little bit of an overview. I'm sort of mid pruning on a lot of different trees in this little zone right now. Got a mulberry here that I cut back a little bit, Balaton cherry, all the peaches. So anyway, it's a great winter job to do. Here's my next mess of a peach to deal with. This one actually is about as weird as it gets, because the original tree got blown over and I thought it was dead, so I kind of left it, but then it shot up all these other shoots, which I should have pruned off 2 years ago. But then we had a baby and I haven't had time to come prune. So now I have a little bit of time to prune, and I'm doing a little bit of catch up here.